Kevin, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to make this video because it's been about 3 years since I started learning Blender, and Blender has been a huge part of why I started this channel in the first place. It's been a while since I looked back on my learning journey progress, so as it gets to the end of the year, I wanted to re-examine where I'm at now with it and where I can take those skills going into the new year. So just for some context, I started learning Blender 3 years ago in 2020. I was at the time in a role that was more producer oriented, so it wasn't as hands-on, but for the majority of my career, I was a traditional digital designer. And I'd really missed having a creative outlet to be able to make things in. Because of the pandemic, I got laid off and I thought it was a great opportunity to start learning creative mediums I was interested in, so I started a YouTube channel to document that process. I learned things like paper crafting, drawing, AI and ML, and Blender 3D. 3D was at the top of my list, and at the time, I was looking to start learning Cinema 4D because it integrated well with the Adobe programs I was already familiar with. But as I was doing research, I found an abundance of learning resources for Blender 3D and awesome content creators that were really helpful and welcoming. So I decided to pursue learning that instead. And here we are 3 years later. So in this video, I'm going to do an overview of all of my work from the past 3 years and then give my thoughts on what I think about my learning progress up until this point. Afterwards, I'm going to provide some tips and insight that could help if you're looking to start learning Blender as well. Every project that you'll see here actually has a process video, so if you'd like to learn more about that specific project, you can check out my channel playlist. I'll leave links to the major ones below. Alright, so I started with very beginner tutorials and a lot of them from Ground Abbott. It was really helpful in helping me understand the basics of 3D and the Blender interface. It was very foundational to do his tutorials because it made me feel confident in making things of my own. I also experimented with scripting, which was really cool. And then I started moving over to more complicated structures and understanding how to build out a scene. Then I did Deduza's grease pencil tutorial, which was kind of my first exposure to grease pencil and helping me understand how that could work in 3D. And after the first 45 days, I ended up modeling a Nintendo Switch, which was really fun because I wanted to do something unguided without like a tutorial. After I pursued the art that I was really interested in, which was non-photorealistic rendering. So I started to move in that direction of combining grease pencil with 3D elements, building out environments like this Mario scene, and then this lo-fi scene, and even trying to animate some of them because animation was also kind of new for me. Typography is a big thing in my work, and I even made my first Instagram filter with augmented reality. And here I just started pushing things I was learning, like working with armatures and animation, experimenting with shaders and different styles, like the Studio Ghibli inspired scene. This Christmas scene was one of the biggest environments I'd built at the time with the train running through it. And it was just so much fun to be able to build upon what I was learning. These flowers were part of my very first tutorial, and I was trying to get faster in Blender, trying to make a piece a day for a week. And I started to create abstract things and experiment with just more effects and explore different techniques. Here I'm just trying to work with geometry nodes and again, more exploration in different styles and starting the little MAXWELL project. And I think around this time is where I started to get in a rhythm of setting a specific style for myself and picking something that I really like to do, which was 2D, 3D art. But I think working with things that I wasn't really familiar with, like more geometry nodes, vertex paint, even trying to create pixel art was just extremely fun for me to try. And then at the end of the year, I remade that Nintendo Switch into a style I was more familiar with. All right, so year one was really fun. It was very exploratory and I had a really exciting time just doing something new. I think I was just basking in the joy of learning Blender, and it was just so much fun to experiment with modeling, grease pencil, geometry nodes, shaders. So I think I had the biggest growth spurt because my heart was in it, and I think I really liked the projects that I ended up creating. Now for year two, I think this is where things, especially around the halfway mark, started to change. Year two started off the same with more experiments on social media, but I started to create bigger environments and large-scale illustrations, this one using geometry nodes and grease pencil. I also tried to create a cinematic scene with the gingerbread escape, and this is actually from my first truly grease pencil tutorial, the bakery and the cake. So if you've done those, thank you so much. I went back to typography, which was something I was more comfortable with and had fun experimenting with that and another illustration style. And at this point, I was really solidifying what I really liked, which was like that ethereal, glowy look. And I kept that aesthetic when creating assets for my course, which are seen here. And this is the capstone scene from that part one of the grease pencil course that I made, which was the medieval fantasy village, and the postcard, which was really fun to make. So I still like the projects that I made this year, but there was a significant decrease in them. And I think it's because I ended up a lot more busier than the first year. I had the opportunity to come back to Disney, but in two different departments. And I was a little optimistic about how much time I could devote to that. And then I started my Magic Storybook course at the same time. And then I was trying to juggle my YouTube channel. So obviously I wasn't really in the right situation to be able to commit to something like this, and I think the time management really got to me. It really set back a lot of my learning, but I was still okay with how much I was able to do given the circumstances. All right, so year three was really fun because I was able to get back to a couple of ideas and projects that I had on the back burner. So this was the Haunted Mansion scene that I did based off Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. I just wanted it to be as whimsical as the attraction. And this is actually from Halloween, so it has like some fog effects, which was really cool to try. For Christmas, I made this ornamental piece, but here I was actually experimenting with a watercolor like shader, and then I expanded upon that in this piece, which was actually inspired by like a Sailor Moon city, working with different colors and lights. This was a fun challenge because I was trying to get a travel poster look in Blender 3D, which was really cool to try. And then I went back to that ornamental and city shader and tried to make a treehouse, but this time with the grease pencil brushes to make it feel dense. So it was a really fun experiment, and I ended up liking this style a lot. This was for my third tutorial for my Valentine's Day balloon, which was really fun because the focus was on the galaxy balloons. And then I went back to working with typography and again using the grease pencil brushes. This was an ambitious scene for me because I had been wanting to redo my branding for a while, and I wanted to create a piece that revolved around me and my interest. I had my little rubber hose avatar for almost 6 years now, and so I thought to update it. So I had rigged a character and created an office with a lot of things that I really liked, and it ended up being a really fun project. So I was really happy with how it turned out. But I haven't been able to change out my branding stuff yet. This is actually from the second part of my course. It's the night version of the medieval fantasy village scene. And I created this as a lead-in into the second capstone scene, which is the alchemy lab. So the alchemist was there the entire time. This was a tricky scene to make because I wanted to make something that was accessible to people learning grease pencil, but challenging at the same time. So there's a bunch of different techniques used here that I think actually worked out in combination with the theme. So I was actually really proud of this one. This is actually for my Magic Storybook course, but it was the first time that I had made a semi-realistic environment and something towards marketing like a trailer. I really enjoyed creating this because it paired really nicely with the script that I had written and conveyed the idea of having your 2D images come to life in 3D with Blender and Grease Pencil. These pages were made with movies as the textures so that you could flip them. And this castle was used many times, but it ended up being a bonus exercise. Now this was a recent piece that I made, but it was something that I started 6 months ago, but then had to take a pause because I was working on things, and then I resumed it, just finished it recently. You can check out that process video. And it was something where I really wanted to push what I was doing in Blender stylistically, and I really liked the end result. I think other than my course, this is probably my favorite piece from this year, which is the little Maxwell Giving Tree short. So I actually made this in 2 days, and honestly you can tell because it's a little rough around the edges, but I'm really proud of this one because I think this is where I've always wanted to go, which is to make stories in Blender. Alright, so 3 years in Blender, what did I think? I'm really proud of the pieces I made and really like the quality of them, but to be honest, I kind of expected a little bit more out of my learning progress, especially after 3 years. And I think this stems from not really having a sort of like a clear goal or idea to work towards. So I think for like the first year, my goal was to learn the ins and outs of Blender and find the techniques and workflows I really gravitated towards. But I think by the second year, I really should have kind of established some sort of a foundation of what I was trying to build up so that I could continue my learning progress in a more focused way. That's not to say I regret any of the pieces I made. Like I really liked the progress, especially like in year 3. Like it was a lot of fun to finally execute ideas that I had been thinking about doing for a while. But I think especially when you're learning for something for a long time or some amount of time, I think more than a year, kind of just wish that I was building something out of it as opposed to just doing, you know, experiments. And I really love experimenting with new technologies, don't get me wrong. Like I really love the rush of trying something new and, you know, seeing what cool things I can make out of a new technology. But I think with Blender, and after having used it for a while, I kind of knew in the back of my mind where I wanted to go with it. And that was to create things that were a little bit more story driven. I think it's very telling that the pieces I really enjoyed making were the little Maxwell shorts, like the most recent one, and Gingerbread Escape, and the sequences for my course. And again, it's not necessarily that the quality could have been improved. Like of course the quality, like especially the animation quality could have been improved. Like I'm not really an animator, I don't really consider myself one, but I really think what I cared about is being able to tell a cohesive idea or story through whatever I was making. And I think this is something valuable to keep in mind, especially with my pieces going forward. So that's really it. I really liked all the pieces that I made, especially again, the ones from year 3. But after this re-examination, I'm really looking forward to focusing my efforts on the pieces to come. So for tips, I think the first one would be to have a goal. This would have been really helpful for me starting year 2. I think in year 1, my goal was really just to learn Blender and what I could do with it and what its capabilities were. And that was really helpful for me at the time because it was very exploratory and I was still figuring out what I was leaning towards, which was non-photorealistic rendering. But I think by year 2, being able to have a goal of like, okay, so I want to create shorts, I want to create things that are more cinematic, I want to build something. I think that would have helped me focus my efforts and would have been way more beneficial for me in the long run. So tip 2 would be that YouTube is a really great place to start learning. There's an abundance of learning resources and content creators that are super helpful and welcoming, especially for Blender 3D. If you are looking for grease pencil specific resources, some of the creators that I'll highlight, and I'm so sorry if I pronounce your names wrong, is Dante, who's super passionate about grease pencil and has really informative videos on learning the tool. Sophie Jantek, who has awesome creative process videos of using grease pencil in her work. Sketchy Squirrel, that has resources on rigging grease pencil for animation. Lucas Reznick, that is also great for animation and rigging. OpenClass does a lot of experiments in Blender 3D and with grease pencil. Dedu's, whose tutorial I did very early on, which was really helpful and helping me understand how to translate my 2D art skills into 3D. And Gakutada, who was actually just featured in the Blender 4.0 splash screen. Some of the other creators that I've seen are Mumu Mundo, that's a really great resource channel. Dr. Patsunko, which is actually a Japanese channel, but I remember watching one of their videos with subtitles and it was actually very thorough, so I highly recommend checking them out. And Katie Sketch, who is an animator, but I think she has really great content on animation with grease pencil. So the next 3 aren't really tips, but they're questions that I get asked pretty frequently. And the first is, do I need an art degree or an education in order to do 3D? And the answer is not really. I actually have a business marketing degree and I started my career in marketing, but I changed over to post-production. Then I became a developer, and then I became a designer, and then I became an Imagineer. And I've had many different career changes, and I don't really think, especially for a creative career, that a degree is necessary. I think when it comes to a creative career, what actually holds more weight is work and experience, especially if you're talking about creative programs. Like what we're using now could potentially be outdated in the next 4 years. So I think it's especially hard to go to school for certain specialties. However, I won't knock going to a art school, primarily because I'm sure there's some foundational and valuable knowledge to be learned. The next is, I don't know what to make, what should I make? And I get asked this pretty frequently as well. I think that knowing what to make is part of the creative process. Being able to realize the creative idea or concept that you have in your head in the medium that you're working with is really important. It's fine to join a challenge where you do something a day for 30 days, or you join a community where they also have a challenge. The thing is, if you decide to do a creative career professionally, you're gonna have lots of opportunities to make things that you don't want to make. So you might as well take the opportunity to do the things you want to now. It really helps you become more confident in the decisions that you make in your workflow. So the next is to have an observer's eye. So if you find an artist that you really admire, I think it'd be helpful to learn about their workflow and techniques so that you can improve your own. The next one is to document and finish your projects. Maybe more so finish your projects, but I think it's really important to do so because the next one is always going to be better. I used to have a tendency not to finish them, but I think that being able to finish a project is mentally closes that project in your mind so that you can start thinking about the next one. Most of the time I end up revisiting a project, and that's totally okay, but I think being able to finish one is very important to your creative process. The next one is to do other things. So this is, I think, extremely important because I think like in the second part of this year where I really wasn't doing a lot of my own personal projects, but working on more work things, I really had to find other things to focus on rather than just Blender itself, because Blender was my hobby, but it had become my work. I was really wanting some sort of a break from Blender, so I got back into the gym, got into plants, and doing other hobbies. I think you really need that mental break so that you can come back and feel energized. The last one is to have patience, and it's never too late. So I started learning Blender in my 30s, and you can do the math, but I've been that kind of a person where I've always been interested in, new creative things. So I don't think it's ever too late for anything. I love picking up new hobbies, and I think that that's probably never going to change about me. So Anyways, thank you so much for watching my 3-year Blender journey with me. I really appreciate it. It was really fun to look back, and I'm really looking forward to the future. Also, if you want to learn more about Grease Pencil and support me, you can check out my course Magic Storybook on cgboost.com. In it, I teach you everything you need to know to get started with it, and in the most recent update, I focus on how to use Grease Pencil in a workflow that combines 3D elements. We'll explore techniques to create vibrant 2.5D scenes that move from beyond the flat page into dimensional space. Don't worry if you're not a drawing pro or are new to 3D, this course is totally beginner friendly. There's over 10 hours of content, downloadable project files, and access to help anytime you need it. Anyways, Happy New Year everyone, I wish you the best and I'll see you next time.